Ready? Okay. Good morning. I was at a Kiddush in the summer. A very chashuv crowd, like a lot of Magidei Shir, some Rosh Hashivas, a few Rabbanim, and the discussion around the table, the hack, so to speak, around the table was, what was the Chiddush of yeshivas? There was always, what we know in the yeshiva world, we call Rav Chaim Volozhin the Aviyah Yeshivas, right? Volozhin is called the mother of all yeshivas. Maybe by the Hungarian world, the Chassam Sofer is the Aviyah Yeshivas, and Prashburg is the mother of yeshivas. But there's something about the world of the yeshiva, call it the Metzias, the Chavtza yeshiva, that was introduced, a few hundred years ago, 200 years ago, that had some sort of sticking power, that was able to be copy-pasted in towns and cities all around the world, that survived the Holocaust, it made the trip to Eretz Yisrael, it made the trip to America. There's something unique about the yeshiva that was created, that's something different. I mean, Chazal say, Me'olam le'paska yeshiva me'Yisrael. We know that Yehuda went down to Mitzrayim to make yeshiva before Klal Yisrael got there. There are yeshivas that were open in bubble for 800 years, 1,000 years. So what is it that's unique about these yeshivas that were created? And the Olam had different theories. They batted around a little this, a little that. I think that, Mibeina Amudi, the Olam settled on that yeshiva didn't develop its independence from the Kehillah until after Volozhin. Meaning the yeshiva as an independent entity that runs its own show, that's in its own Beis Medrash, with its own leadership, with its own rules, its own structure, and not connected to the town that hosts it, or the village it found itself in, or the culture it was part of, is a unique thing that was created. And over time, it expanded, it grew, it strengthened itself. And that's what yeshivas became. They became their own center of gravity. Yeshiva wasn't, secondary to Kehillah thing, to this, to that. Yeshiva became its own center of gravity. Now, what happens when yeshiva became its own center of gravity and became like its own creature living in its own universe is, like all things, it developed its own minhagim. Yeshivas have something that became loosely known as minhagei yeshivas. Minig Nazis, people are very, concerned about the origination and the orientation and the exact pratim minhagim. Will say that yeshivas don't really have their own minhagim. It's just a mix of minig poilin and this and that. And there's what to talk about, but that's not what I'm talking about today. The exact discrepancies on if there is something called minhagei yeshivas or not. But they became something known in the Welt as minhagei yeshivas. Now, in our generation, they're already like luchas, put out by different yeshivas of the minhagim of said yeshiva. I think over here we follow the minhag of Tervadas yeshiva. BMG has their own, Hag B'chachma. Other Sfardish yeshivas have their own. There are luchas, and there's a lot of different minhagim. Now, what are some of the minhagei yeshivas that are controversial? Let's say like Karta Shmoneh Esrei, like mincha, short mincha during the week, is a halachically controversial thing, but that became very nafutz in the Ilma yeshivas. There's other, what do you say? Yoitzeris, what to say, what not to say, piyutim, yoitzeris, krevis, etc. All that thing, exactly. Now, one of the most, a good inflection point of a fight on minhagei yeshivas to me is the story of Kiddush before Tkiyas Shofar. Today, a lot of shuls even that we daven in are aligned with the Olam HaYeshivas, and today it's almost commonplace to find a Kiddush in a shul before Tkiyas. You'll find exceptions where they don't make Kiddush before Tkiyas. But generally, shuls that have Beigrei Yeshivas that are aligned with the world of the yeshiva world will have Kiddush before Tkiyas. Now, in America, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, the world of the yeshiva was far from established, and it was an America that was ran by Amaratzim and some old Litvische, Russian, Belarusian, Litvische Rabbanim. That was the tzibur, and that's how it was ran in America. Now, of those, Rabbanim, most of them today we know almost nothing about them. They were, tremendous ga'inim, people who knew all halakim of Torah thoroughly. Some of them left over Sfarim, some of them didn't. Some of them have family members who survived and became from flourishing families. Some unfortunately did not. Of those, who was maybe the standout Rav from that tzibur of, I don't know if he's the only, we could call him the standout Rav, was Rav Yosef Eliyahu Heinken. Rav Heinken lived on the Lower East Side. He's today someone who still is known. Many of the minhagim in Ebenezer in America, and even to some degree Chesh Mishpat in America, are set by different landmark positions and cases that Rav Heinken weighed in on throughout the years. Rav Heinken, Vaislavaya, so that's something. He died in 1970, I think, or 1972. So there we go. He was like a standout. He was a classic Litvische Rav. Now Rav Heinken was yeshiva trained. Rav Heinken at 12 years old was a tremendous guy, and he grew up in Belarus. He was a tremendous guy. Actually, I think at 14, 12 or 14, he collected money for a train ticket and he went down to Mir Yeshiva, not knowing anything about the procedures of getting into Mir, and he submitted himself to be accepted into Mir Yeshiva. The Hanhala in Mir Yeshiva, I'm not sure who was in charge at that point, spoke to him, schmoozed with him. They felt he was very credible. He was a capable young man, but he was way too young. As we know, Mir Yeshiva had Bachrim into their 40s. But Mir Yeshiva was for a much older type of Bachar, and they told him that this is not a place for you. And he writes later in his writings, machmas, some sort of technical difficulty. I wasn't accepted into Mir Yeshiva, and I ended up learning in a small town, a shtetl, like an hour drive from the Mir. And he said in the year that he learned in Yener shtetl, like in the outskirts of Mir, I think it was either a year or 6 months, he chazed Erevin 40 times. Mesachtas Erevin 40 times. And when they told this over to I forget all the details, they told this over to a different Adam Gadol, he said that he chazed it 40 times in the year it's not the Kiddush for me. The Kiddush is how he got through the first 2 times. And once he knew it, I get it, he chazed it again and again. How did he get through the first 2 times as a 12 or 13-year-old boy in a town all by himself, in the outskirts of the Mir? He never went back to the Mir. He becomes one of the first Talmidim in Slutsky Yeshiva by Mrs. Zalman. He learns there, I think, for 6 years. He becomes extremely close to Mrs. Zalman. Mrs. Zalman was only 11 years older than him. Mrs. Zalman was a young man when he opened the yeshiva. Heinken was 11 years younger than him, but he learns that he becomes from the first Talmidim. Now, eventually, he actually opens a Kiruv yeshiva in Georgia, not Atlanta, Georgia like in the Russian Caucasus for mamish, like bottom basement level, educated Jews. One of his friends, who was a Rav with him there, who was a Rebbe with him there, Rav Telushkin, said if they were teaching Chumash in the yeshiva, that was already a good day. That was like a high-level day when they were teaching Chumash. So it was mamish below his pay grade, but he goes there to that town. Eventually he leaves. The Soviet Union happens. He's getting persecuted, and he emigrates to America in the early 1920s, and he moves to the Lower East Side, and he becomes like the Mara de Astra of America. And he gets a job. Actually, he worked full-time with Heinken in Naskanis, but he worked full-time. He became the director of Ezra's Torah, a big stock organization. He worked there for 42 years, I think, full-time days. Anyone who knows him says he put in full days in the office in Ezra's Torah's thing. During his tenure, he fundraised and distributed $6 million from like 1920-something to 1970-something, which is, that's tens and tens of millions of dollars today. During the Holocaust itself, he gave out personally at $1.3 or $1.5 million. He was a big Gabbai Tzedakah by the standard of the day, and also had many psakim. He put out some svarim, some psakim. Recently, Rabbi Kleinman from Flatbush, through the pushing of Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, republished Gvuras Eliyahu, 2 volumes, which is all his tshuvas, and it's much more accessible. It's beautiful. Okay, now that's the background story of Rav Heinken as an old Litvish Rav in an America that really didn't have yeshivas yet, and that in the 50s and 60s was transitioning to the world of yeshivas. Yeshivas were opening, Rosh yeshivas were becoming more prominent, Tanhaga was going over to the Rosh yeshivas. In 1955, I think Rebbe Silver tried to resign his position in the Agudas Rabbanim, allegedly because the whole committee was now Rosh yeshivas. The name was Agudas Rabbanim, but it was all Rosh yeshivas. It was transitioning. Now, one of Rav Heinken's main, like I call it a carryover from the old world of Litvish Rabbanim to the new minig in the yeshiva that really bothered him was this minig. That in yeshivas, the minig became, Rosh Hashanah comes, you daven Shachris, you laning, you take a break, go make Kiddush, a few minutes, some mezainis, some, I'm sure back then it wasn't anything. There were no meat boards, there wasn't even pickle boards, there was nothing. It was just, you go do mezainis with a little bit of lekach and bramfin, a few minute break, come back in, and then they would do tkiyas and the rest of davening. Now, Rav Heinken made this like his jihad, for lack of a better word, to put an end to this. His anical, Rav Yehuda Hertz Heinken in Shalosh Shuvas B'nai Banim and Shuvat Tesvav, he writes that any Adam Gadol who came to visit Rav Heinken, who happened to chance upon Rav Heinken during the Tkufa, of Yamin Ram, like call it from the summer to Rosh Hashanah, Rav Heinken would ask him, what do they do by you? Where do you daven? What do they do? And if the person would tell him that they make Kiddush before Tkiyas, Rav Heinken would give him a homeless shmuz. Shapur Masachim, you have to fix this, you can't do this, it has to change. And this was like, he made this mamash a mission. Now, Rav Heinken wrote in to HaPardes, which was the rabbinic periodical in America. At the time, it was published by Rav Shmuel Pardes from Chicago, actually something that Rav Heinken pushed him to start, decades earlier. Rav Heinken used to publish his broadsides, his psakim, his drushes, whatever it was in HaPardes. And Rav Heinken in HaPardes a few times published tshuvas, writing how shrekelchit is this minig to make Kiddush before Tkiyas. It's not allowed, it's aser behechlet, he said. It's a toas, mushrush, and aser behechlet. You're not allowed to do it, it's mamash aser, terrible. Now, there's a great conversation, it's actually published in Gvuras Eliyahu now. It's a great conversation between Rav Mordechai Gifter and Rav Heinken. Now Rav Gifter was in his, I'm going to say, mid-40s. Rav Heinken was in his high 80s when this comes. Rav Heinken had a lot of Richasim. Rav Heinken lived till he was 92 years old. He lived a very long time. Rav Gifter writes to him as follows. I want to read you Rav Gifter's letter. He says, Re'isi v'karasi ba'apartis ha'achron. I read in the last month edition. My Morei Ashaboy Kosev Harav Agoin Shamati shenisfashet minig ra lachal kaidem tkiyah shofar. You, Rav Heinken, wrote that you heard there was a minig ra that was nisfashet to eat before tkiyah shofar. V'dvarav habaytim ha'elahim pegia b'yeshivas hakdoshos. These words that you're writing are pegia in the yeshivas, in the world of the yeshivas. Yeda na hadar kvoid terase sheminig zel litaim. This minig to taste. V'lei chas shalom lachal, not to eat chas shalom v'nei tkiyas. Nagu by yeshivas hakdoshos belita al piga einim v'kedoshay elyon she'ein b'dereinu dar yaro daf echad she'achal amid b'fneim. This was the minig that was avegeshalt in the yeshivas in Lita. By the grace of Gedolei Lita, the Gainim, there were yeshivas there, and there's no one in our generation who could argue in them. Kei nagu betells biyamai al pi admor hagayvid v'ramzal hashem yimkim damai v'chol rabbeisei hakdoshim. I should do it justice with the proper accent for this, but lefneihem al pi hagainim Rebbe Sivlei Rav Chaim Rabinovitz ubetach yedei shekei nag hagra kotler. For sure, you know Rav Heinken. He says there Rav Aaron was nag like this also. V'lei hinigzais mi'atzmil shekei nasu b'slabatka b'mei hagram Epstein Moshe Mordechai Epstein v'againim b'Sezalman v'againim Nassim Tzvi Finkel the Alter v'yidua shekei nag bekelm al pi Rav Simcha Zisel v'shemati shekei hunag al pi Rav Yisrael Salanter v'chol elu yadu din pashut. All of these people that I just listed, they knew a din pashut in Shulchan Aruch. Afal pikei nagu came. Even so, they made this minig. Umuftachani shegam you too yedei time of nimukam. I think that you secretly also understand why it was mutter, and it's not just keneged din Shulchan Aruch. I can't believe that your pen spit out this terminology that it's a minig ra and something these gainim did. This is thing. Now it's a fascinating conversation in just the fact that it's a young Rosh Hashiva. I don't even know if it was a Rosh Hashiva yet. Regifta was probably a Ram. A young scion, Edil Igdula, future Rosh Hashiva in one of the primary yeshivas in America at the time, writing to an elderly and well-established Paisik, maybe Paisik of America at that point in time. It's hard to say Ramesha him at that point. At some point Ramesha made the transition, but at a certain point Rav Heinken was the Paisik Hadar writing him. Now Rav Heinken actually wrote back to Regifter, and this is a great conversation. It's Yom Dalid, Gimel Mar Cheshvan, Tafshin Lamed. Tafshin Lamed is 1970. Rav Heinken was already 89 or 88, very, very old. He writes as follows: I want to write back to you what you wrote to me in response to my thing. He says, Hine, it's a crazy tshuva, it's a short tshuva, one paragraph. He says, Hine, yesh mishnah bepeya. There's a mishnah bepeya that says as follows: Afilu tisha v'tisha oimrim l'chalik v'echad oimrim l'voz l'zeh shomer shomer kahalacha. If 99 people say to do it, we're talking about distributing peya, to distribute the peya in an orderly fashion where the balabas gives it out to the aniyim, and one person says, let us go run for it, which is how the din is supposed to be. Shaimin lay, we listen to him, Shaimer kahalacha, he's saying la halacha. V'chein lahepach, if 99 say the right way and one says the wrong, and say even one person can insist. I am pirish naiseliyo haklal. This is the pirish naiseliyo from the Gaon says as follows: haklal misha oimer oisha oisa davar afilum hu yesh le pniya b'davar she'oisa oimer imhu kahalacha shaimin lay. Even if there's bikaris in what he's saying, if he's saying the right thing, he's doing the right way, we listen to him. Amru Chazal, what I wrote in that part of this is the halacha brura. It was left over in Shemayim, a place for me to make the guideline over here. Okay, he says, I apologize to you. I will stand on my post in regard to this thing. And also all the other things that are written in my name, the other criticisms that are written in my name. And in that paradise over the next few months, even years, it played out different people writing in letters, either in support of Rav Gifter or in support of Rav Heinken. Of Isaac Osban, who was Rav Gifter's cousin through marriage, wrote in a longer tshuva about a few different nekudas that Rav Heinken had bikaris on, and the fight went on. Now this is just it's a fascinating discussion between a really elderly Rav, a Pesach Hadar, and a younger Shiva. Now, so what is the shmuz? What is the bekitzer? What is the talk? Silent side Isser of Heinken's side and silent side Hatter. Now, I don't know how much time we have. Let's talk like this. The din that you're not allowed to eat before mitzvah, before davening time, is brought down probably 7 times in Shulchan Aruch. Now, by Lulav, by Chanukah, by Mincha, by Shachris, by Megillah, It's brought down many, many times in Shulchan Aruch in the Achronim. Now, what's fascinating is, and I need to point this out right out the gate, is that there's one place where it's not brought down. The Shulchan Aruch Behilchas Shofar never brings down not eating before Tkiyas. It's a fascinating thing. Shulchan Aruch does not say it. Now, there is no reason to be mechalik between Shofar and other mitzvahs. It's a mitzvah abba mizman lizman. If you look in the Rishonim and Brachas, they talk about it, the Mashal, the Ritva, and the Ran, and others who talk about it, they lahedya conflate them. Meaning you'll see in the Ritva and the Ran, they lahedya conflate Shofar, Lulav. There is no real makam for distinction because they're both mitzvahs abba mizman lizman. The mitzvahs that come at a set time, once in a while, and you have to do them, you not eat before them. Now, I just want to note that in the Hiseris HaTshuva and Rabbi Yashiv, both in their Tshuvas where they talk about this, both of them in their Tshuvas where they say it's Aser and agree with Rav Heinken, both say, but Lemaisa, isn't it an oddity that it isn't brought down in Shulchan Aruch punkt by this din? Like it's like an anomaly that by Shofar it's punkt not brought down. Now, so let's just talk about the din a little bit. So the din is as follows. The din is it's Gemara and Brachas. The Gemara and Brachas is actually more common. The Gemara and Brachas tells us you're not allowed to eat before davening. Someone who eats before davening, the Gemara says actually very harsh l'shainis. The Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, "Leiseichlu adam." You shouldn't eat on al adam. The Gemara darshans, "Leiseichlu kedem sheyispal al dimchem." Don't daven before you daven for your lifeblood. And then the Gemara also says, someone who eats and then he davens, Allah v'akasav and him the pasuk says, "Va'osi yishlachta achrei gavecha." You threw me after your gavecha achrei geyecha. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, "Achshen is goya zeh kibulei malchus shemayim." After this person was misgoya, he took care of himself. He was haughty. Then he was mekabel on himself malchus shemayim. Now what this Gemara is saying is two different pratim. The Gemara Brachas is telling us, first of all, the Algemein Adin, that you're not allowed to eat before mitzvah. And that's the Gemara in Sukkah and Daf Lamed Ches, and the place in many different places on Meirachon. I don't need to cite chapter and verse. Everyone's familiar with that din, that we don't eat before this. By most mitzvahs, we don't eat before the time, when it's time for the mitzvah, before the mitzvah. Now, what the Gemara Brachas is introducing is also a second nekuda, is that when it comes particularly to Shacharis, which involves Kabbalah Salman Hashemayim, which is like something extra special, over there's like an extra reason to not eat. When you're holding by being Kabbalah Salman Hashemayim and you go and eat first, that's like a double pagiyah. A, it's a pagiyah because you're supposed to be doing the mitzvah, and B, because you've been Kabbalah Salman Hashemayim now, why are you going to eat? And some of the Paisikim who bring down not to eat Rosh Hashanah time before Tkiyas make note of that as well. They say, Rosh Hashanah l'chayra has both. We're going to start Musaf with Tkiyas, you're going to do Shofar, you're going to Tshuas Melach Boi, Shetamlichuni Aleichem, Ubameh, B'Shofar. We're doing all this whole very, very large manifestation of Kabbalah Salman Hashemayim, probably the largest manifestation of Kabbalah Salman Hashemayim of the whole year, and you're running to go eat. Hayitachan, it's a peki and Yena din also. Now this is a din that's cited all over Shulchan Aruch. And Simon Peitas is Shachris, Reish Lamed Beis is Mincha, Lulav is Tafresh Nun Beis, Megillah Tafresh Tzadik Beis. All the different places. Now, where it should be in Shulchan Aruch by Shofar is in Tafresh Pei Daled. That's where it should be, and it isn't there. But Afanart, the Shari Tshuva from Ephraim and the Shari Tshuva and the Mat Ephraim and Rabbi Kveger and some Tafresh Pei Tes a little bit later on all jump in and say the regular din of not eating before davening applies before Tkiyas also just like everywhere else. And Rabbi Kveger, interestingly, is on record, and even in a more practical sense. I don't remember the year, but during the later Tkufa of Rabbi Kveger's job as Rav of Posen, there was a Magefa that struck the town. Rabbi Kveger and his Bezdin made many rules, safety rules, like COVID rules, social distancing, how many people could be in a minyan, and etc. Later, during COVID, someone actually dug it up and published it in a sefer called the Baisid Bakun, of like Rabbi Kveger and the Bezdin of Posen and Rabbi Kveger's Psakim during Shas Magefa. But it's actually in Chuvas Rabbi Kveger and Chelik Dalet, and the nice one, most of it's in there also. In there, Rabbi Kveger writes that someone who's feeling shvach on this Rosh Hashanah that was during the Tkuf of the Magefa, and he feels like he needs to eat, he should do as follows. He should come to shul, listen to the Tkiyas to Miyoshiv right after Kriyas HaTorah, then go home after those Tkiyas, make Kiddush at home, eat a little bit, come back to shul, and you'll be fine. You'll daven the rest of the davening. So now, Rav Heinken notes this, and others note this as well, is that Rabbi Kveger only says to go after you already heard Tkiyas. Meaning once you heard Tkiyas, the Miyoshev, you already heard 30 Tkiyas, you Yotzim Midiraisa, you made a bracha and you Yotzim Midiraisa, so then go home and you'll continue. That's much less of an Inyan. He says the Inyan of not making a hefsek between the Tkiyas the Miyomid, the Tkiyas the Mumid, and the Tkiyas the Yoshev, that's just a Takanas HaGa'inim. Over there, if you're shvach and you feel like you don't have Kaychas of Musaf, you need it, no problem, you make on that. But this din of not eating before Tkiyas in the beginning, that's a din muchlat, that's a din in Medina, the Gemara, that's Issa muchlat, that is no wiggle room. As Isaac of Heinken and many other of these Paiskim, none of them talk about it as vociferously as Rav Heinken, or made it as much of an Inyan to be on top of, but many Paiskim talk about it, and many of the famous Paiskim that we know were very makbid about it. Shlomo Zalman, even until deep into his very old age, was pretty makbid about this. Rabbi Yashiv was makbid. The Stipler was very makbid. Grace the Rebbe, the Kotzke was makbid. The Sadigeri Rebbe was makbid. The Tzanze, the Shineve, a lot of Rebbes or Sheshivas Gedolim were very makbid about this. It wasn't Rav Heinken's Einfall to be makbid not to eat before Tkiyas. This is something that's well built up. Now, so what is the Tzadim L'Hakal? Meaning, where did it come from to make it like this? Now, the obvious answer, and everybody knows that this is the truth, you just have to figure out how to buy the size, is that davening got too long. That's the truth. Davening in a Russian shtetl, 300 years ago, probably didn't last as long as davening in yeshiva lasted. Do I have a chapter verse particularly to point you to for that? No, I don't have clock records of the Russian shtetl, but from between the lines, what's pretty clear is that davening got longer. And davening got longer by Leilam Yeshivas. It also got longer by Rebbes, meaning in Chassidish shuls, where there's a makela and a choir and specific nuschayis and songs, and it's a production. Davening got much longer, and it gets hard to go on Rosh Hashanah davening till, I don't know, it could be 2, 3, whatever it is. What do you say? 5 is much, but yeah, exactly right. To go do it davening without a break, without eating anything, it's detrimental to the davening. It becomes Yatzis Chara B'Efsedei. And because of that, there needed to be some sort of kula, some sort of provision carved out to allow for people to have a te'ima, not a gross meal, and not supposed to sit down and have a suda then, but to eat something before tkiyas. Now, because of that, in the Eilam Yeshivas, where davening got long, is where that showed up first, let's say, to start doing it. And over time, as shuls who modeled themselves on the world of the yeshiva extended the davening as well, meaning in Israel davening in 1940 in America, you were home by, I don't know, I'm going to guess by 12 o'clock you were home. Right, l'chol hadayis, you were home early enough to eat your suda and everything was fine. As davening got longer and shuls modeled themselves on the yeshiva and there was a need to extend it, so there became this extension. Now, so what's the various structures? So structure number one is that according to many poskim, and each one of these things we could go into by Arichas much more, but according to many poskim, there's an issa to fast in Rosh Hashanah. It's a machlekes poskim if there's an issa to fast in Rosh Hashanah. We are naktinon for most people that you're not supposed to fast in Rosh Hashanah, unless mamish libay noikvay, and for you that's a particular hana, in which case for Yom Tov there's makom to be mekel, and maybe a person can fast in Rosh Hashanah. But generally speaking, the halacha is you don't fast in Rosh Hashanah. And there's a machlekes achreinim, the Chayadam, the Gain, the Aruch HaShulchan, and others, if there's an issa to fast past Chatzos or not. According to the Gain and the Chayadam, you're not even allowed to fast past Chatzos. Chatzos is the Zman Sud already, and fasting past that is already a Pegi in Kavod Yom Tov. You're supposed to be eating already. So there are those who say, Hayos, the Gain and the Chayadam held that you're not supposed to fast past Chatzos, and davenings had started to go as a standard past Chatzos. So in order to shtim these two things, there had to be a kula to do some te'ima, which is not such a big deal, be tayyim, and then you continue davening. The problem is, as he's holding up his coffee cup, the Aruch HaShulchan says you could be yotze the not fasting with a tea or a coffee. Just have a coffee or tea. You don't have to make kiddush. Do it even before davening in the morning, or do it maybe before musaf, which according to some you still don't need kiddush because it's just a drink, it's just a tea or a coffee, and do it in biyotze and zalzayin. That's it. You don't have to do more than that. So again, it's not a full answer. Others say something interesting is that the din in Shulchan Aruch is that a yachid who's davening is not supposed to blow tkiyas within 3 hours of the morning, and it's gebracht al pi the mekubalim. The reason is because the first 3 hours of the morning, because Baruch is yeshav al kisei din, and it's a much more chamadik time. So if you're a yachid and you don't have the power of being enveloped in a tzibur and having the schus harabim, you don't blow shofar during the first 3 hours. Now in shuls, we anyhow don't blow shofar till 3 hours, and it takes time to blow shofar, right? So say some poskim, Rabbi Soryak Fisher writes this, that the zman tkiyas is not really till a little bit later in the day. So provided that you make your kiddush, you make your hafsaka within 3 hours of the day, which only really helps for vasikin minyanim, it doesn't really help for an average minyan, provided you do it early enough, so then you're not really in violation. It's not really the zman tkiyas. Now the problem is, A, that only works for vasikin minyan, which, I don't know if it still exists, but in Zichron Moshe, when Rabbi Soryak was the Rav, what they would do is his minyan would daven vasikin shachris, they would get till chazar sashatz, they would stop, take a break, go home, make kiddush, do whatever you needed, and then came back for the regular minyan and joined up from Chazar Hashatz for the rest of the davening. Because the inyan of a Sikin is only for Tefillah Shachris, so you get it out of the way, do it. And okay, there's Bikairis, people said Chazar Hashatz is toughest to the Tefillah, it's not shaykh to come join in later, and there's Bikairis, and Rabbi Yisrael writes about this in Befalpul, but Akapanim, it really only helps for his hybridized minyan, meaning his lamdis to explain why you can make it, really only helps for that. Even if a yachid is not allowed to blow tkiyas during the first 3 hours, it doesn't mean it's not the zman tkiyas. A yachid has it's a punkt. There's a reason why a yachid shouldn't blow. It doesn't mean it's not zman tkiyas. So these are that's some of them. Now there's I'm trying to think. I'm missing a bunch. Well, we said so far, people are hungry. That's really number one. We said you're not supposed to fast. We said it's maybe not the zman. Oh, then there's a few different ones as follows. There's an interesting one that says as follows. There's a din in Shulchan Aruch, Nechus Yom Kippur, that if you're davening the piyutim Yom Kippur night, you're allowed to do it la'or ner, even though usually on Shabbos you're not allowed to use an ner because there's a chashash miyata, you might increase the light. But on Yom Kippur, Eimas Yom Kippurim alav. It's a frightful day. It's a fearful day. It's a potent day. You're not going to just sit and play with the lights. So there are those who say we could copy paste that. Eimas Rosh Hashanah alav. Nobody's going to forget to do tkiyas. The reason why you're not allowed to eat before mitzvahs is because Shema Yimshach v'yochel. You're going to end up eating. You'll have a big suda. You'll drink. You'll eat, and you'll forget to do the mitzvah. But you're sitting in the middle of Rosh Hashanah davening. Eimas Yom Adin alav. It's Eimas Rosh Hashanah alav. There's no chashash. You're going to come to be Yimshach, and therefore you're allowed to make tkiyas. Now the problem is that that's not how Takanas Chachamim work, generally speaking. Generally, when Chazal are geyser, they're geyser. It's kol midas chachamim kein hu. There's lay plugs. Chazal don't say because it's very easy to say not everybody's as fearful on Rosh Hashanah, and some people take other mitzvahs much more seriously. It's not shavuot chol nefesh, meaning every person in every situation can be a little different. There are others that say that since it's done b'tzibur, and Rosh Hashanah brings this down. Rosh Hashanah in 3 places. We made the mizman and Chuvas on August 2 times. He says, "Heyos it's done as a group, Rabbi Midkiri and Alayu. Everyone's going to remind each other, and it's not going to be something that's going to be problematic. And Mamela, if you do it b'tzibur with everyone together in shul, that's not a problem. And therefore, he says it's a big Indian not to go home during the break. Don't go home and eat at home, because then you're in violation of Chazal Shema Yimshach v'yochel. You stay in shul and you eat with everybody. Okay, no, that's not such a big deal. Now, and the raya that maybe could be brought to him is that Reb Kveger in that letter says kol echad yelech lebeisai yasa kiddush, and he should eat. So Reb Kveger, who's saying to go home, that's what he says. Only do it after you already heard tkiyas. But if you're going to stay in shul and do it as a tzibur, then even Reb Kveger would be maskim that you could do it. In the morning. Yeah, others say pasha that it's just te'ima. The main way is just don't eat too much. Now the problem is that again, Nasat is Rech L'Shurim, because I want to take you on a field trip to Kiddush on Rosh Hashanah, and you'll tell me if everybody's being makpid to only do te'ima or not. You know what I'm saying? So that's a Rav Gifta says that, and that is a primary rationality of Mekel, is that it's not only te'ima. Now I want to point out, I think I have to wrap this up right. I just want to point out that the Chassam Sofer in Yeridea in Tshuva Zayin has a whole tshuva about someone who's a nichva. He has epilepsy, and the shaila is really about him. This guy Nebuch became ill, and he had 2 very prime jobs in town. He was the sheichet, and he was also the Bal Tefillah on Musaf for Rosh Hashanah. And both of these jobs are problems with being a nichva, because the sheichet, for obvious reasons, if a guy could have epilepsy, he could have a tremor or some sort of shudders going on. How could he be a sheichet? That's problem number 1. And problem number 2 is that he was not able to stand on his feet for that long without eating, and he needed to eat and to drink a little bit before davening, before he went for the Amid. And the Chassam Sofer and Tshuva Zayin will leave the shchita part aside, but when it comes to making Kiddush on Rosh Hashanah, the Chassam Sofer actually says to do it before Tkiyas and Gansen, the way we do it now. The Chassam Sofer says go home, make Kiddush, and do it before. And because of that, the Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Zayin, Chelik Hey brings down that Hagam that he's maskim to Rav Heinken's push, Hifriz al Amida, to call it a Toyas Gamor, because the Chassam Sofer in the Tshuva says this, and Rav Heinken's grandson in Bnei Banim in Tshuva Yadalid, he has a whole maracha to explain why a nichve is an actual sakana. He says, my grandfather was never talking about someone who's in real danger, someone who could be a real sakana. My grandfather was talking about people who want to convince themselves that they're in danger. They want to tell themselves the shvach. He says, people who want to tell themselves the shvach, that's what my grandfather was talking about. People who are actually shvach? Rather, my grandfather's not talking about people who are actually shvach. And there's probably another 5 that I'm not remembering now, but to be continued. What do you say? What?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.